Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 2 of the Workwolf podcast. I am your host, Frank Crupi. Today, we have a very special episode with a very special guest. We're going to be speaking about the future of work and work innovation with Jim Harris. And because this is a live stream episode we are doing, so you can find us live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, we'll be taking questions from our listeners. So if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in the comment section and I'll bring them up accordingly. So Jim Harris is a leading disruptive innovation speaker. He's been ranked as one of North America's best business speakers, speaking internationally at more than 50 conferences a year. He's also a thought leader on digital disruption and digital transformation, writing columns, articles, white papers, etc. on disruption. One of the disruptive innovation books he has written is called Blindsided. We'll talk a little bit about that today, which discusses how businesses can mitigate the impact they experience from disruption in the market. Mr. Jim Harris, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Great to be on, Frank.
Absolutely. So, Jim, I've watched some of your previous talks, and I got to tell you, they're so eye-opening just in terms of, I think, how much we take for granted in terms of our technological advancements, and how far we've come in such a short time, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're experiencing the greatest rate of change humanity has ever experienced. In 1961, if you go back to look at computing then, a gigaflop is doing 1 billion transactions in a single second. And in 1961, a gigaflop was $164 billion on mainframe computers. And today, that same gigaflop is 1 cent. And that's like so 2021, Frank, because like next year, it'll be a half a cent. So there are more than 24 laws of exponentially changing price, performance, and technologies that are all happening at the same time. And when these are compounded on top of one another, the resulting change that can be enabled by business is just head spinning. So we're living through this profound amount of change.
It certainly is a profound amount of change. And I'm excited to see where the future is going. I watched your TED Talk last night, and it's interesting. Toward the end of your talk, you talked about how in 1900 there were no cars on the road; it was all horses. And just 10 years later, there were no horses; it was all cars. And like what an incredibly large change in a relatively small amount of time, a decade, right? So I guess my question is, where do you see the overall look and feel of work going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, this pandemic has driven so much change. It's turbocharged change. We've seen more change in the year and a quarter of the pandemic than we have in some industries that are 5 or 10 years. So, for instance, Dell Computer has 165,000 employees, and they've said that 50% of them will never come back into the office. They'll work from home. Now, they may come into the office once a month for a meeting or, once every 2 weeks or something, but they're not going to be expected to come into work. And just a recent poll of Canadians, only 20% of Canadians want to go back to the office every single day. 60% want to only come in for 3 days a week, and 20% never want to go back in. And what are some of the reasons for this? Well, most people don't realize the stress that commuting in rush hour places on us. The average North American worker spends 5 work weeks a year in traffic jams getting to or from work in rush hour. Like, is there nothing better we can do with 5 work weeks of our time every single year? That's insane.
It is insane when you look at it from that perspective, and as well commuters, the additional cost, right? The price of gas is soaring, the wear and tear on your vehicle, especially when you have a commute that some could consider far, and especially in Toronto here where traffic is a disaster most of the time. like the autonomous vehicle concept is something I'm sure a lot of people are really looking forward to, and I know that's something as well that you hit on very much so in your TED talk. Is that actually going to happen? Because I know there's still a lot of skeptics out there that say, as a society, we will never totally fully give in to that autonomous concept, because there are still so many people that love driving their vehicle and use it as a bit of an escape. And sometimes large changes like that can take time. So I guess my question is, how far is that down the road from it being a true reality, do you think?
Well, it's a lot closer than we think. Autonomous vehicles are very much tied to electric vehicles, because the electric vehicles that, for instance, Tesla produces, Tesla isn't a car company. It's a computing company. It's an AI company that its products that we know happens to have 4 wheels. But, think about that 5 work weeks a year that people spend wasted in traffic jams. And the majority of people who commute are in, just a single person in a car, right? So if that commute time, I was in the back seat, reading, writing, Skyping with my family, watching a movie, sleeping, it would be a very different experience. And we could use that time that's in commuting. So it is going to profoundly change. One of the things that I look at is the cost. The cost to own an electric vehicle will be cheaper than a gas car in 2 to 3 years. For right now, the average cost of a car is $40,000 for a new car in Canada. But we all know that EVs are more expensive than that. But once they're cheaper to buy, who's going to buy a gas car? There are going to be certain people who will buy gas cars. Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld. There's something about comedians and cars. So those 2 guys will still be buying cars. So Detroit doesn't have to worry. They'll have 100 or 200 cars each.
Right.
But the average price of a car per mile has remained constant when adjusted for inflation for 100 years at 70 cents a mile. This is US dollars. But once we have autonomous vehicles and robo-taxi fleets, so think about Uber and Lyft, but just with no drivers,
right,
the cost per mile drops to 25 cents. So imagine you can get around anywhere you want, any time of day or night with a robo-taxi, but you just don't have to own the car. And it's 2/3 less per mile travel. Like, who is going to buy a car then?
Yeah, it's so true. And what's funny is, like, you have people that live in large cities that are already kind of doing this, right? Like, I have friends that live in the city of Toronto, and they're into their 30s and they haven't owned a vehicle in years. And they take public transit and they walk and they bike. And I have one friend, for instance, that he Ubers everywhere. He comes home to visit his family north of the city. He's got to go meet a client in the West End. He takes an Uber because overall it's significantly cheaper than owning a vehicle.
Absolutely. People don't realize that the average car is about $11,000 a year to own.
Yeah.
When you look at the depreciation of the vehicle, that's the biggest expense. Maintenance, operational costs like gas and oil, and then insurance. And so when it moves to transportation as a service, the whole industry changes. Right. And so people aren't thinking about all these changes that are going to happen. And that's why right now, the value of Tesla is worth the same as the 6 largest car companies in the world. That's head spinning. And, the talk you looked at, it's actually something called Idea City, which is like TED, but it's Canadian. I was talking about this in 2017. So if you had listened to my talk in 2017 and invested in Tesla, you would have done very well for your stock portfolio.
And there's a lot of people that wish they invested in Tesla 3-4 years ago. I did buy a little bit of their stock maybe a year and a half ago now, and it's continued to do well, and it's going nowhere but up. But like, what a stranglehold they have on the market already, and you continue to have. You got me thinking a little bit now too, Jim. So for people that own gas cars right now, I mean, we're thinking that in the next 2 or 3 years, overall value of those cars is not going to be the same, right? Like if you have a vehicle that is worth, let's say you would put your vehicle on the market right now for resale that's worth 20 grand. In the future, that will be significantly less, right?
So we used to have 2 cars, and then the pandemic hit, and we weren't even driving. We're only driving 1 car about 2,000 kilometers a year right now. Mm-hmm. So the normal average for a Canadian car pre-pandemic was 16,000 kilometers. So why am I paying insurance on 2 cars? We actually gave one of our cars away to a friend, and he needed it. So because he lives outside of Toronto. So we went from 2 cars to 1 car. Mm-hmm. And then the 1 car is only doing 2,000 kilometers a year. So why are we paying insurance for 16,000 kilometers, the average? So the Canadian Automobile Association has the first ever pay-as-you-go insurance, where you pay a base rate of $350, and then per 100 or per 1,000 kilometers, you pay $120. So this year, we're going to save more than $1,000 on insurance because we're paying as we go and we're not using very much.
That's a great idea. You know what? The Canadian Automobile Association, is that what you're
CAA, yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that was an option with CAA.
Yeah, it's called My Pace.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So and you track all your trips on your smartphone, and we've done less than 1,000 kilometers in 6 months.
Wow. Well, there's a valuable tidbit for the people who will listen to this podcast, because we're all doing a lot less driving, myself included, only coming to the office, our Workwolf office here, only a couple of days a week. So yeah, definitely going to check that out. Thank you for that tidbit. Let's shift off of the automobile industry for a moment. And, you talked about insurance, the insurance providers. The way that they provide service and just their industry in general is going to change and maybe kind of disappear, right? What industries do you see taking the biggest hit in terms of becoming irrelevant versus which industries do you see are really going to prosper from the direction we're going in?
Well, every industry is ultimately threatened with disruption. So you talked about insurance. There's a company in New York City called Lemonade that you can only apply for insurance on your smartphone. And back in the 1990s, if you had a car accident, it took you 8 weeks to get your check in the mail for your claims. But Lemonade has the world record for a claim settlement of 3 seconds, okay? So this was a kid got his parka stolen in a New York restaurant pre-pandemic. You answer all the ClaimSpot questions on your cell phone. You take a picture of the police report, goes up into the cloud. It runs against 18 fraud algorithms and comes back down and says your claim's approved. It now takes the bank 3 days to transfer the funds, but that's another industry that's going to be disrupted. But insurance has been the way it's been for 100 years. 94% of accidents in cars are due to driver errors. So Teslas are 85% more safe per million miles traveled. So Tesla is beginning to offer insurance to Tesla owners at 30% less than traditional insurance companies, but the claims are 85% less. Wow. So they're making more money, and they're going to disrupt the insurance industry. Television, Netflix and over the top, it's called OTT or streaming, is disrupting the traditional cable providers. Zoom is disrupting telcos. Zoom is disrupting airlines. Do you know Zoom is worth more than the top 6 airlines by revenue in 2019 added together? Who would have said that pre-pandemic, but now that Zoom is the major mode of doing business, 100%, and that is crazy. Yeah, like I know an insurance company that used to say the only way you can put a new insurance policy in place is with this. the pen has magical properties.
Yes.
The ink is magic. And so this guy had to drive 2.5 hours west of Toronto, meet with a prospect for 45 minutes, hopefully sign a deal, and then be in traffic 2.5, 3 hours back to Toronto. So you get to see one prospect a day. But on Zoom, you can talk to 8 people and sign 3 deals. And you're not wearing and tearing on your car. So like there are going to be permanent changes that are going to occur when we come out of the pandemic. Like people want a hybrid model. I'll go into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but for Friday and Monday, I'm up at the cottage, right? So then I'm not in traffic getting up to the cottage, right? So we have a 4 days block where we can, go cycling in the day and, like, are we living to work or working to live?
Yeah.
And we're going to see, for having young kids or elderly parents, people want a different kind of work environment. So that's going to change forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, are we living to work or working to live? I mean, the answer to that question will vary depending on what part of the world you live in, I think, right? And I know especially here in North America, the work culture is different from other places in the world, right, Jim? And especially even in Toronto, like the hustle and bustle of Toronto compared to West Coast vibes in Vancouver is vastly different. But I mean, the changes will be different throughout different areas of the world because of the way that we work and live in various places of the world, right? So I guess my question is, what areas will go through the most disruption, so to speak?
Well, the transportation system we've talked about quite a bit. But ultimately, all this starts with having to understand the fundamental trends in technology. So I was working with 300 CEOs up in the mountains in a beautiful 5-star retreat. And we had so much fun, the group invited me back the next year. So I went back and at the dinner before, like the sponsored dinner, the night before the event, one of the CEOs pulled me aside and said, I just have to tell you what happened in the intervening year. And I said, Jeff, I'd love to hear it. He said, well, I want to expand. The way I normally would have done it is another $15 million custom design build manufacturing facility. But you told me I have to think differently. I have to consult my millennials. I have to think about an Airbnb assetless model. And so I did all those things. And we came up with, why don't we identify a manufacturing facility in the US that has way too much capacity and rent it? And we did. We found a brand new building and manufacturing facility that had been just built, and they'd overbuilt by 100% to allow for future expansion. We got to rent that for 3 years, pennies to the dollar. So I totally de-risked my expansion. I've been cash flow positive. I turned what would have been a CapEx into an OpEx. And look at the de-risking in terms of the expansion given the pandemic. He's not left servicing $15 million of debt. He can carry an OpEx if the whole thing is shut down very easily because it's under 10 cents on the dollar. So so I said to him, Jeff, coming to this conference saved you $15 million. And he said, yeah, I guess it did, Jim. I said, you're buying my dinner tonight. Like, I got to change my business model and take, some contingency fee on the ideas.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
But the first thing is to what if you're deploying 15 million capital? What is the value of having gone through a session to provoke you to think differently with your executive team? How much is that worth? Given the $15 million Jeff saved.
Yeah, absolutely. Where in the mountains were you specifically?
Kananaskis.
And where, sorry?
Kananaskis.
Kananaskis. Where is that?
The Rockies. It's in the Alberta Rockies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's just this beautiful, oh my God, we live in such a beautiful country.
We really do. What's amazing is people don't realize the beauty that is in our own backyard here in Canada. And travel's been cut down. People are, even as we ease back into a state of normalcy, travel, the concept of traveling itself, people are going to be skeptical always, I think. Some people will be. And like, it's our country's unbelievable. There's so much to see here. So that's a good for some individuals to check out. Autonomous planes. Now you got me thinking. Is that something that is on the radar as well?
Well, we already have autonomous planes. What's autopilot? You know, one like
okay,
planes.
maybe not. Maybe that you're right. Autonomous wasn't the right word. Captainless planes. How about that?
Okay. Well, yeah, we will eventually get to that, but you know, that's not the first area. Like the $10 trillion transportation market, road transportation market, is going to be electrified. I'll give you one quick thing. There's something called a Tesla Semi, which is a semi truck, and it costs $180,000 US to buy, but over 1 million miles or 1.6 million kilometers, it will save $200,000 in fuel. In other words, the entire capex is saved in opex. So Loblaws has bought 15 of these. They haven't had delivery because that's the Texas plant that will produce them, that Tesla's building right now. But think about this. So what they're going to save over 1 million miles for these semis is $6.4 million. Okay, that's Loblaws. Now, to understand grocery retailing, you have only 1 cent per dollar of net profit. So you have to sell $1 of groceries to make a penny net profit. Wow. So for Loblaws, to get the same bottom line profit on these 25 semis, they'd have to sell $640 million of additional groceries. So which do you think is easier, Frank? Saving 6.4 million through, you know, these 25 semis, or increasing Loblaws' sales by 2/3 of $1 billion?
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory.
So think about the change that's going to drive in the, you know, trucking industry, right?
Yeah. Speaking of saving, it's top of mind for a lot of young professionals and you know, people that are early on in their career. Do you see the need to have different types of skills in the future really playing a major impact in young people's lives? So these individuals that are coming up, kids, you know, people going through university, young professionals like myself, in the future, the skills that we have now, I can't see all of them being applicable. And again, what do you see needing, or what type of change do you see with the skills that people will need to be successful and make a decent living?
So the number one skill for 2025, according to the World Economic Forum, and I used to go to Davos every year. I didn't go this year, and I'm certain in January it won't be happening in Davos in 2022 either, is analytical skills and innovation. So, you know, how many innovation courses do you see offered at universities? If you actually survey CEOs, 88% of CEOs will say innovation is essential to their top line and their bottom line. I don't know what the other 12% thought when they were asked this question, but only 22% of companies have an actual formal system for innovation. So imagine we said the same thing about sales. You know, 88% of CEOs say sales are essential to their top line and their profitability, but only 22% of companies have salespeople. Only 22%, train people in sales. Only 22% have a CRM like Salesforce to help their salespeople. Like the other 80% of companies just hope that sales will organically, magically happen by happenstance. That's insane.
That's not how it works.
and yet that's what we're doing with innovation. So
people think,
everything I do is focused on innovation and disruptive innovation. Mm-hmm. And Leanne McAleer, who I work with, is the program director of the Center of Excellence of Innovation. She teaches companies how to innovate. What are the systems they have to put in place to innovate? This is what we have to focus on. The number one skill for the future according to WEF, innovation, and yet 80% of companies don't have a formal program of innovation. This is horrific in a time of rapid change.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be baptism by fire when they realize, we're going to have to change to get with the times here really quickly. We've talked a lot about change now and where you see the future going with these disruptions. Will anything stay the same?
Well, some things are going to stay the same, but some things change. We haven't talked about all sorts of other industries, like in retailing. Amazon is worth more than Walmart, Best Buy, Kohl's, Target, and 4 other retailers added together and tripled. So online commerce is changing forever the way retail works. And we're going to, so how are retailers keeping up with that? How do we individually keep up? We think that mentoring is people with gray hair or no hair importing, giving their wisdom to young people. But young people have technical competencies that people who are typically older than them don't. So there's this whole category of reverse mentoring. So Jack Welch, when he was CEO of GE, didn't know anything about the internet. So he had some 20-somethings who came in every week and mentored him on the internet. It's called reverse mentoring.
Wow, interesting.
And that's what Jeff did when he consulted his millennials about his expansion, right? So are leaders engaging and listening to millennials and Gen Zs about how they should structure their system differently? Because if a company or an industry is not smartphone centric, it can't get 3-second claim settlement. It has an 8-week process. And seriously, who wants to have an 8-week process?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about blockchain. It's a very innovative technology. It's something that a lot of people, if you ask the average person to define what the blockchain is, I don't think, most people would be able to give you a real concise answer. Where do you see blockchain's role fitting in this disruptive future of technology, and how crucial can it be to some of these changes?
Well, it will be. Don Tapscott, who's a Canadian, believes that blockchain will be as transformative to the world as the internet has been. But we're in early stages. We're just past the 10-year mark. But I'll give you one example. If you have a Filipino nanny, and just for disclosure purpose, I have no Filipino nanny, but if you have a Filipino nanny, she'll be sending $200 a week back to her family in Manila. And, the banks or Western Union will charge her 11.18% on average, which is usurious. So there are apps that use blockchain that only charge 0.25%. And here's this radical thing: water runs downhill as a principle. So the remittance market, people sending money back to a different country, is a $700 billion a year market globally. So people who can't afford that 11% usurious take off the top on just $200, they might not be a blockchain miner themselves, whether it's Ethereum or Bitcoin, but they will go to a third-party service that uses that 0.25 underlying cost structure and charges them 2% instead of 11. So we've seen markets, like niche markets, like remittance, shift en masse to using blockchain technologies to transfer money. Imagine that Facebook gets approval to use its Libra cryptocurrency, and sending or receiving money is as easy as instant messaging on Facebook Messenger. Does that mean that Facebook would be a competitor to banks, that people would get addicted to sending and receiving money through Facebook at a fraction of the cost and far faster than you can with banks? So, every industry can be disrupted.
Where do you see? I'm going to ask this because you mentioned every industry can be disrupted. Where do you see the professional sporting industry getting disrupted in the future? I'm a huge sports guy. I'm a former NCAA athlete. What type of change do you see coming to that space?
Well, many changes. Like, what is sports? Esports, or digital sports, is the
Right.
fastest growing category of sports. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and nobody knows about it unless you're a gamer.
Yeah.
Like, and so the pioneers are people who are using new platforms like Twitch for ways that are new. So imagine that, we filmed sports in relatively boring ways, but Intel has been working with drones. And here's another technology. Back in 2007, a drone was $100,000. So it was only the military that used it. But now you can get an entry-level drone for $100.
Yeah.
Or a prosumer, a really high-end drone for $1,000. So think about Intel having a football game and having 50 camera-based drones flying around. And like when they run out of juice, they come in and charge and another one takes its place, like switching a player during the play, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you now have 50 cameras in 4K filming the thing. And you could actually, as an end user, say, hey, I want to see that play from this angle.
Right.
And so it's not a monocast. Like, broadcast is so freaking boring. It's one angle that's chosen by the digital mixer, the editor.
Yeah.
But imagine you have the freedom to see things from any angle, or they embed a camera in the helmet of the player, the QB or the wide receiver, and you see the guy actually running and you see him turn to catch the ball. And like, imagine how fascinating and interactive. And imagine you end up putting this on Twitch. So you have 10 people or 1,000 people. You got the professional editor who's mixing their version of the football game, but you got 10 people who are fans of Team A, and they're mixing their footage entirely differently. So if you're a fan of Team A, you want to see your QB, not the other QB. I hate him. I want to see all the sacks of him, right?
Yeah.
So, like, imagine being able to create your own broadcast, or to mix your own broadcast, and then people subscribe to your broadcast because they like the way you mix it better. And so you end up with a Twitch view of sports. It's real physical football.
Yeah.
But the mixing is all digital, and end users are empowered. So this is like totally different way of seeing sports. But like, how exciting would that be?
Oh, you got me excited just listening to you talk about this, Jim. You got the arms on my hairs going up here. I mean, the thought of, let's say you have someone who's a huge LeBron James fan, and they say, I want to watch an NBA game, and I just want my camera on LeBron the whole time.
All the time.
And
I want 7 angles on him.
I want 7 angles of LeBron James. He could be sitting on the bench. He could be scratching his head. I don't care. I want to watch him the whole time. And what that would do as well for players, like building their own brands, and it's crazy. It's crazy. I love it.
Like, isn't this cool?
It is very cool.
So the technology itself is cool because it's declining in cost, like from 100,000 to 1,000, right? Or $100, right? That's 1,000x decrease in cost. The technology enables a new business model. That's part one. But what's really exciting is new business models. So the pro sports teams and the broadcasters have to let go of that footage to allow people to mix it. And that's what they're not doing.
Yeah.
It's a mental problem.
Yeah.
Right? It's a business model problem. But if you could create a business model and a monetization thing, in other words, some money goes to the team, some money goes to Twitch, some money goes to the mixer, right? it's like YouTube open sources the creation of content, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And YouTube is growing faster than cable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For
But
real.
it's a totally different business model, and you have to. That is where we come back to the thinking and the innovation mindset being the first step, which is what I work with executives.
Yeah. And why do you think people have trouble overcoming that business model fault? Because you're 100% right, Jim. That's exactly what it is. And I'll give you a great example. Like the NHL. The NHL notoriously does a horrible job in marketing, and they are so behind compared to other leagues in terms of the way they display their product. Another good example is, are you familiar with the XFL? It was a league. It was a spinoff of the NFL, and they were only around for a few years. And they actually came back this year. The pandemic kind of put a halt on that, but they were doing things with the camera angles. They had the drones. They were being really innovative with all this types of stuff. But it was a startup league. They didn't get traction. But you look at them, and they're like, okay, here's essentially a semi-pro league that is trying this. Why is the NFL, a massive corporation, why are they not ahead of the curve, and why are they not the ones doing this? Just like you said, it's a business model problem. So how do you convince the bigwigs that are running the NFL that, hey, you guys got to get with the times quickly, or else you're gonna get caught up by a Twitch or some type of a YouTube spinoff.
So let me ask you this: who is closest to the future? The 65-year-old who has his assistant print out all his emails physically, or the 18-year-old who's on Tinder?
100%, yeah.
Who does all the strategic planning?
Yeah.
Who is most disenfranchised from strategic planning?
Yeah.
Is it any wonder we only get incremental change? So my question is, what systemic processes do you put in place in an organization that's an incumbent to allow for innovation at the edges? So, for instance, the NFL should have a group of millennials and Gen Zs who are experimenting and playing with this stuff, piloting, this exciting drone angle Twitch partnership, right? But they're not doing that because the decisions are being made by 65-year-olds who like the way things are, and they've been promoted based on a business model that they were successful at historically, but they're not now. Most of this disruption comes from companies and people outside the industry. So, like Elon has no experience in the car industry. He's got no experience in the rocket industry. He's got no experience in the solar industry. He's disrupting, and the energy storage industry. He's disrupting multiple markets, and he has no experience in those industries. And so is that no experience a disadvantage or an advantage? If you're bright and you engage bright people, it's an advantage because you're not beholden to the old ways of working, be they business models, be they ways to produce, ways to manufacture. Yeah. You can think in new ways. And so this thinking is the key part.
Yeah. It's fascinating, Jim. I tell you, you've kind of opened my eyes in the last 40 minutes here to what innovation really means. I see a lot of books in the background there. Is your book Blindsided back there somewhere?
Yeah, it is. But if people want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn, and this is a magazine cover that I did. Like, fantastic. Can you believe, Frank, they sent a photographer to my office to take 300 photos of me, and this is the one they picked?
That's the one they picked.
like, Frank, do I look A, sinister? B, do I look evil, like Dr. Evil? Yeah. Or C, do I look demonic?
I think it's a blend of all three, but if I was going to pick one, it's the Dr. Evil. All you got to do is put the pinky up, and you might as well be him. Like, that's perfect.
So, I think my career as a runway model ended before it began, right?
Yeah. You picked the right career, Jim.
So people can connect to me on LinkedIn. Mention the podcast.
Yes.
Because I get thousands of connection requests and I don't accept them all. So make sure you mention the Workwolf podcast, but sure. I'll connect to people online and then they can get some of these digital resources for free. Sure, go out and buy my book, whatever. But there are a ton of digital resources. And if anybody knows my business, one, I speak at conferences and seminars all around the world, and everything's customized. Two, I write, I do consulting, and I do some social media. So if you've enjoyed this and can think of a conference where I could add customize everything, please let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. A great way to segue to close this off, this podcast. I know you do so much in terms of speaking, and you're very accessible, which is great for a polished professional like yourself. So thank you for being so open, and we thank you for your time here on the Workwolf podcast. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up, Jim? I mean, you're a fascinating guy. We could talk for hours, but is there anything you'd like to say to close here?
Just the essential thing is thinking. So if you go to my website, jimharris.com, there's some videos you can watch, and there's some articles you can read. And really, that's the first step, beginning to think differently. And from there, you can begin exploring areas.
Right. Amazing. We did have some questions that came in. Do you have a few minutes to just look at a few of these questions?
Sure.
Let me just have a look here.
Why don't you ask whatever one you feel?
This is interesting. Should companies pay employees based on where they live?
Well, that's I can argue either side of that question, because, for instance, if you live in Toronto, your cost of living is a lot higher than if you live in, I don't know, Nova Scotia, in Halifax, say. Right. So the cost of living can be quite different. So that might be an argument for paying people in Toronto more because their cost of living is higher.
Right.
However, what we're seeing is some profound shifts. People who are young millennials and Gen Zs in Toronto are moving to, for instance, Durham. The price of home prices of Durham year over year went up 24%. And in Kingston, Ontario, which is 2.5 hour drive from Toronto, in December, from December 2019 to December 2020, there were 55% more home sales. So young professionals are saying, hey, with the average price of a house in Toronto, detached house, more than $1 million, why don't I, go live in Kingston? For a condo, a 600 square foot condo in Toronto, downtown Toronto, is $640,000. So that's 600 square feet. Or I can have a house in Kingston for $500,000.
Right.
With a white picket fence and a backyard, and which is easier? If there are two of you during the pandemic living in a 600 square foot condo in downtown Toronto, and you have a pet or a baby, you are going crazy.
Oh, yes, you are.
Yeah. So we're seeing some shifts, and young professionals are saying, hey, if I can work forever from home, why don't I have a home in Durham or in Kingston? So we're going to see some, changes.
Right. Well, listen, Jim, we'll have to bring you back for another Workwolf podcast episode in a few years, maybe, when some of these changes are happening before people's eyes, and then we can get the scoop on what is coming even further down the line. So, Jim, this has been great. Honestly, thank you so much for joining the podcast today, and we'll hope to have you back in soon at some point.
I would love to be, Frank, and I look forward to connecting to listeners. Jim@jimharris.com is my email, or just on LinkedIn, Jim Harris.
Beautiful. There you have it. I want to thank everyone for tuning into episode 2 of the Workwolf podcast. For Jim Harris and your host, Frank Crupi, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. Cheers.